Why do we instantly judge a stranger based on their clothes? Why do good people sometimes stand by and do nothing in a group? Human beings are social animals, but our social instincts can lead us down dangerous paths. Today, we enter the complex world of social psychology to explore the biases that govern our group behavior. We'll tackle stereotypes, peer pressure, and why we often blame the victim. So get ready to rethink your social world. I'm Danny, and this is a new episode from English Plus Podcast, and this is our fourth episode from the theme of this week, Understanding Cognitive Biases. We're going to start with a short story about David's first date. That's coming next. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. The automatic glass doors of the Sterling Solutions building hissed open, and David stepped inside. He was a whirlwind of first-day nerves and excitement. His portfolio had landed him this graphic design job at a fast-paced, prestigious company, and he was ready to prove himself. Unfortunately, a fender bender on the freeway had turned his perfectly timed commute into a frantic, stressful crawl. He glanced at his phone, 9:08 a.m. He was 8 minutes late. He found his new manager, a stern-looking man named Frank, tapping his foot by the coffee machine. "David, right? You're late." Frank's tone was clipped. He didn't ask what happened. In his mind, the equation was simple. Lateness equals a lack of professionalism. A lack of professionalism equals a lazy employee. He made a quick mental note. This new guy has a character issue. Not a great start. He didn't consider the city's notorious traffic, the possibility of an accident, or any of the dozen situational factors that can derail a morning commute. He just saw the behavior and judged the man. As Frank led David to the team's open plan office, a few heads popped up over their monitors. They saw a young man, probably in his mid-20s, with vibrant artistic tattoos running up his forearms and a trendy haircut. A quiet consensus began to form without a single word being spoken. Carol, a veteran of the company for 2 decades, thought, "He looks more like a barista than a senior designer. Probably spends more time on his appearance than his work." Another colleague, Bill, mentally filed him under inexperienced millennial, likely to be entitled. They hadn't seen his portfolio, a body of work that was more impressive than almost anyone else's on the team. They just saw a few visual cues and let a lifetime of generalizations fill in the rest of the blanks. Later that day, the entire team gathered in the main conference room for the weekly project meeting. Frank, still radiating an air of authority, proposed a new, incredibly risky marketing campaign. It was built around a viral challenge that seemed, to anyone who had spent more than 5 minutes on the internet recently, about 6 months out of date and slightly cringeworthy. A heavy silence fell over the room. David could feel the hesitation. He saw Carol subtly shake her head. He saw Bill exchange a wide-eyed "Are you serious?" glance with the person next to him. Everyone could see the potential for disaster, the wasted budget, the public ridicule. But no one wanted to be the first to challenge the boss. The silence stretched on, and in that silence, a dangerous agreement was forged. To speak up would be to create conflict, to disrupt the harmony of the team. So, they said nothing. Then a senior team member, hoping to curry favor with Frank, said, "That's a bold idea. It's risky, but it might just be crazy enough to work." Another colleague, who had been nervously tapping her pen just moments before, nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, I agree. It's different. It'll get people talking." Suddenly, the mood in the room began to shift. The initial unspoken doubts of the hesitant members began to dissolve, replaced by a growing shared enthusiasm. The desire to align with the emerging group opinion was magnetic. Their private hesitation was transforming into public support. A support that felt more certain and unified with each person that chimed in. Finally, Frank turned to the new guy. "David, you're fresh eyes. What's your take?" Every head in the room swiveled to face him. David's mind raced. He thought the idea was terrible. He thought it would make the company a laughingstock. But he was the new guy, the outsider. His primary goal today wasn't to be a marketing genius. It was simply to be liked, to be accepted, to fit in. So he took a deep breath, smiled, and said the words he knew they wanted to hear. I think it sounds great. Really innovative. So that was the story of the first day for David. What a first day! A minefield of unspoken judgments, flawed logic, and social pressure. Not a single person in that room was a bad person, by the way. Frank wants his team to succeed. Carol and Bill want reliable colleagues. The team wants to be collaborative. And David just wants to fit in. Yet, in the space of a few hours, this group of well-intentioned people engaged in a series of social biases that led to poor judgments and a terrible business decision. This is the power of social psychology. Our thinking doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's constantly shaped by the people around us. So let's navigate David's disastrous first day and break down the 5 powerful biases that were at play. Let's start with the fundamental attribution error, the character versus circumstance flaw. Now, let's start with the very first interaction of the day, David's lateness. His manager, Frank, immediately jumped to a conclusion about David's character, that he was lazy and unprofessional. This is a classic, and I mean classic, example of the fundamental attribution error. This bias is the tendency to attribute other people's behavior to their internal dispositional quality, like their personality, their character, their traits, while attributing our own behavior to external situational influences. It's a fundamental error in how we assign cause. Now think about it. When you're late for work, what's the story you tell yourself? The traffic was a nightmare. My alarm didn't go off. The kids were moving so slowly. It's always about the situation. But when a colleague is late, our brain often defaults to, wow, they're so disorganized, or they must not care about their job. We judge them for their character. This is also known as the actor-observer asymmetry. The actor, us, sees the situation, while the observer sees the actor. Now, why do we do this? One of the most common explanations is the just world hypothesis. This is the belief, often subconscious, that people get what they deserve and deserve what they get. It's a comforting idea because it makes the world seem fair and predictable. If we believe that Frank is lazy, then his lateness makes sense in a just world. The alternative, that bad things like traffic jams can happen to good, punctual people, makes the world feel more random and chaotic. Blaming the person instead of the situation gives us an illusion of order. Interestingly, some fascinating research has shown that this bias might not be so fundamental after all. It might actually be a product of culture. Studies comparing participants from individualistic cultures like the United States with those from collectivistic cultures like Japan have found that this bias is much stronger in Western cultures. Individualistic cultures tend to place emphasis on the person as the primary agent of their own success or failure, while collectivistic cultures are more attuned to situational and social context. It's a powerful reminder that even our most fundamental thinking patterns can be shaped by the culture we live in. So that's the very first point that we want to talk about, or the first bias that we want to talk about. Next, let's talk about stereotyping, the dangerous shortcut of generalization. Next, let's look at the reaction of David's new colleagues, Carol and Bill. They didn't know anything about him, except that he was young and had tattoos. From those two tiny data points, their brains created an entire persona: inexperienced, not serious, maybe even entitled. They were stereotyping. A stereotype is a generalization made about members of a group. It is the cognitive component of prejudice. It works by taking a characteristic that might be associated with a few members of a group and then applying that generalization to the entire group itself. It's a quick, efficient, but often incredibly harmful and inaccurate way to categorize the world. So why are our brains so prone to stereotyping? Now, there are two main explanations. The first is the kernel of truth hypothesis. This idea suggests that many stereotypes don't just appear out of thin air. They may be born from a kernel of truth that then gets wildly exaggerated and misapplied. For example, the stereotype psychology students are always analyzing people has a kernel of truth. Psychology students are, in fact, taught theories about human behavior. But the stereotype takes this small truth and inflates it into a caricature that is unfairly applied to every single psychology student. So that's the first explanation. The second and perhaps more powerful explanation is illusory correlation. This is when our brain creates a relationship between two things that isn't actually there. We are pattern-seeking machines, no doubt about that, and we are especially likely to notice and remember when two distinctive things happen at the same time. If a member of a minority group, who is distinctive because they are in the minority, performs a negative act, which is also distinctive, our brain is very quick to form an association between the group and the behavior. We see one instance and our brain creates a pattern, an illusory correlation that becomes the foundation of a stereotype. A groundbreaking brain imaging study conducted by psychologists Mary Wheeler and Susan Fiske in 2005 gave us a glimpse of this process in action. When white participants were briefly shown images of black faces, a part of their brain associated with threat response, the amygdala, showed increased activity. However, when the participants were asked to perform a simple task that required them to think of the person as an individual, like guessing what vegetable that person might like, the threat response in the amygdala disappeared. The researchers argued that stereotyping happens when we see a person as just a representative of a category. The moment we make an effort to see them as an individual, the stereotype begins to dissipate. So that's the second point. We still have three more. Next, let's talk about groupthink, the illusion of agreement, which is very dangerous, by the way. Now, let's enter the conference room, where a terrible idea is about to be approved. Everyone has doubts, but nobody speaks up. This dangerous silence is called groupthink. Groupthink is the tendency of a group to make poor decisions because of social pressures that lead to a deterioration of mental efficiency, reality testing, and moral judgment. The main goal of the group shifts from making the best decision to maintaining harmony and conformity. Psychologist Irving Janis, who developed the theory, identified three main prerequisites that must exist for groupthink to occur. The first thing is high group cohesiveness. The group is tight-knit and members value their place in the group. They want to maintain the good feelings. And the second, structural faults. The group is insulated from outside opinions, lacks impartial leadership, and is often homogeneous, meaning everyone comes from a similar background. And the third is situational context. The group is under high stress or pressure to make a decision quickly. Now, David's new team checks all the boxes. They're a cohesive team, they're insulated in their own conference room with a strong-willed leader, and they're under pressure to come up with a campaign. This leads to the classic symptoms of groupthink. Now, one of the most important is self-censorship. People who have doubts decide to keep them to themselves. This creates an illusion of consensus, where everyone thinks they are the only one who disagrees, so they stay silent, which in turn reinforces the silence of others. History is filled with tragic examples of groupthink. The decision by the Kennedy administration to go ahead with the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961 is often cited as a primary example. A group of the smartest foreign policy experts in the world all agreed on a plan that was, in hindsight, deeply flawed because the pressure to conform and support the new president was so intense. A more recent example is the 1986 Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. Despite engineers from an outside contractor warning that the O-rings could fail in the cold weather on launch day, NASA administrators, feeling overconfident from past successes and under pressure not to delay, pushed ahead. The result was a catastrophic failure that cost 7 astronauts their lives. Believe me, groupthink can have the most serious consequences imaginable. And these 2 examples I mentioned are just 2 examples of so many examples we know of and so many others that we have no idea about, but they're still as disastrous. So that's about groupthink. And now let's move on to group polarization, the march to the extremes. As the meeting in our story continued, something even stranger happened. The team members who were initially just hesitant didn't just agree to go along with the plan, they became enthusiastic supporters. This isn't just conformity, this is group polarization. Group polarization is the tendency for a group's attitudes to shift toward a more extreme position after discussion among like-minded people. If a group of people who are slightly cautious about an issue get together to discuss it, they will likely leave that discussion being extremely cautious. If a group is slightly in favor of an idea, they often become passionately in favor of it. Now, why does this happen? Now, there are 2 main reasons. The first is persuasive argumentation. In a group where most people lean in one direction, the arguments presented will overwhelmingly favor that direction. Individuals are exposed to new and more persuasive reasons to support their initial belief, which pushes their opinion further along the spectrum. The second reason is social comparison. We are constantly, and often unconsciously, comparing our own opinions to those of others. In a group setting, we want to be seen as a good member of the group. If the group norm is to be in favor of an idea, some people will shift their opinion to be even more in favor of it to gain social approval and be seen as a confident and committed member. You see this phenomenon everywhere, especially online. Online forums and social media feeds are masters of group polarization. They connect us with like-minded people, creating an environment where our initial beliefs are not only confirmed but amplified. A person with a mild interest in a conspiracy theory can, after a few weeks in a dedicated online forum, become a passionate, extreme believer because they've been exposed to a constant stream of persuasive arguments and social comparison within that group. It's a powerful force that can shift public opinion and individual belief towards the extremes. And that's not something to be taken lightly. It is a very dangerous thing, and it is happening. And will continue to happen because it is filling a lot of pockets. But let's move on to our very last bias for today, and that's social desirability bias, the need to be liked. Well, we have our new employee, David. Now, he's the center of attention, and he has a choice. Voice his real opinion and risk conflict, or agree with the group and be accepted. Now, he chooses, like most people, to agree. His decision was driven by the social desirability bias. Well, this is the tendency to answer questions and behave in ways that we believe will be viewed favorably by others, even if it means being less than truthful. This bias stems from a deep biological need to belong. As social animals, our survival has long depended on being accepted by the group. Rejection, exclusion, and banishment were once virtual death sentences. So we have a powerful, ingrained instinct to present ourselves in the best possible light. We lie a little. We say we vote in every election, even when we don't, because voting is a socially desirable behavior. We might underreport how much we drink or overreport how often we exercise when a doctor asks. This isn't because we are malicious liars. It's because we feel a subconscious pressure to conform to societal norms and expectations. This bias is a huge problem for researchers who rely on self-report surveys. How do you get accurate data on sensitive topics when people are likely to give the socially desirable answer instead of the true one? Psychologists have developed clever ways to detect this, like embedding specific questions to measure a person's tendency towards socially desirable responding. For example, a questionnaire might include a statement like, "I am always a good listener no matter who I am talking to." The socially desirable answer is true, but in reality, almost no one is a perfect listener all the time. A person who answers true to many such items is likely being influenced by this bias, and their data might be considered less reliable. For David, the bias was a simple survival mechanism on his first day. But on a larger scale, it can mask society's true attitudes and behaviors, making it harder to understand and solve real-world problems. So, my friends, these are the 5 biases that I wanted to talk about that are related to social psychology and social dynamics. But I highly urge you to dig in a little bit deeper. Read a lot more about this because this might be one of the most important types of biases that we need to understand to overcome or to limit, at least to limit their effect on our lives. But with that being said, we reached the end of our topic for today, but not the end of our episode, because next we're going to have the language focus section. We're going to talk about vocabulary, speaking, grammar, and writing, all related to this episode. So don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. I'm afraid this is the end of the free version of this episode. If you want to continue the episode to listen to the language focus section, you can do that by subscribing on Apple Podcasts or on Patreon. You can find the links in the description of the episode. I hope you learned something new, and I hope to see you on the other side. But if that's all you need to know, thank you very much for listening, and I will see you again. Remember, we're going to be talking about cognitive biases the whole week, so there's still a lot to learn. Make sure to come back tomorrow to learn more about cognitive biases. I'll see you then.